Welcome to the Fashion Situation Room, a podcast from the front lines of the fashion industry. I'm your host, Michael Jordan, and these are my two co-hosts.
Hello, I'm Britta Cabanos.
And hey there, I'm Peter McLaughlin.
In this podcast, we offer you real talk about what impacts the fashion industry, particularly through the four S's: strategies, sustainability, storytelling, and solutions. With our finger on the pulse of the most meaningful business trends, which we'll also bring to life with impactful guests along the way, we aim to provide you with actionable insights that will benefit you. Thank you for joining us. Let's jump in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Fashion Situation Room for episode 2. And today we're going to discuss a cultural institution here in New York City, the New York Fashion Week. It happened actually a few weeks ago, but no worries. We're going to do today what we call in journalism a second day story. Not just focusing on the story that was, but looking forward. New York Fashion Week, does it still matter? Does it still play an important role in fashion? Fortunately, both Peter and I are here in New York City. Britta was here during New York Fashion Week. She hosted another show. We'll talk to her about that. And by the way, just a bit of background. I myself was looking this up. That New York Fashion Week was first established in 1943. Back then it was known as Press Week. Then the Council of Fashion Designers of America then turned it into New York Fashion Week in 1993. And nowadays it's a twice a year event. So we just had the spring summer New York Fashion Week. And much of the coverage, there was quite a bit of criticism that we found. For example, talking about is there an identity crisis for New York Fashion Week at the same time that it's Fashion Week season with London Fashion Week just finished up. Milan Fashion Week is about to, Peter, you said about to.
No, Milan Fashion Week's already done and Paris is about to wrap up. So they're all
Few
nearly
days.
done.
Yeah, maybe a few days left only.
Yeah.
Shaisa. Okay, and there you go. So juggling the four major fashion weeks from around the world. But much of the criticism that we saw, for example, uh, from Business of Fashion magazine was talking about Fashion Week's identity crisis. Does it have a clear identity? Is it in need with one? In need of one? We'll talk about that in just a moment. Then there's, can you see this, by the way, everyone? Yes. From Vogue Business, New York Fashion wrestles with reality, plus other takeaways from New York Fashion Week. Lastly, we find another article that actually shined a positive light, framed it in a much more positive way. This article coming from the Philippines, a publication of Philippines Lifestyle INQ, which is, hey, stop being so harsh on New York Fashion
Mhm.
Week. It's not dead. In fact, it's a platform. It's a very democratic platform for new and up and coming fashion designers. So, to kick off our discussion, let me ask our two co-hosts, my friends Britta Cabanos and Peter McLaughlin, what not just what your impressions were, but does New York Fashion Week suffer from some sort of identity crisis?
Peter, do you want to go first or should I
You
dive
go,
in?
you dive in.
Okay. There I'm kind of like on the fence because I think there's pros and cons to both angles or both of these articles. For me personally, I love that New York Fashion Week has become an open an open platform for anyone to participate. So if you are an independent brand, emerging designer, an event host, you can still hold your own events. You can hold your own fashion show. And, obviously you have to find the venue and you need the audience and all of those things, but it's an opportunity for anyone really that's in the space to participate. So I do like that. I think that's a very positive thing.
How about an example, Britta? Because I know you were actively involved during that stretch, visiting.
Yeah. So there's multiple fashion shows that are not listed. So the main calendar is through CFDA, and there's a couple other fashion calendars that do the main big name designer schedules. But then you have all the other peripheral events that are happening, and those, I mean, there's I think I found at least 200 events total, and it's panel talks to workshops to networking, after parties, all of those things. So I did attend, gosh, I attended maybe 3 or 4 different events, and they were all well attended, well over 100 people there. I found them just through my own connections or WhatsApp groups or Googling, Luma, Eventbrite, all of those platforms list events. So for anyone who wants to attend something, you can certainly find a place to go. And there's different pricing. Some are free, some are $40, some are donation, some are $300 and includes a VIP seat with a cocktail. So it's really just finding what resonates with you, a brand you want to support, that kind of thing. So there's all these opportunities to either host your own event or attend an event. And as you all know, like unless you're a Vogue editor, you're not really going to get into those big name tent shows unless you're paying thousands of dollars. So that was really meant for, industry buyers and retailers and magazine editors. And those are the folks that are in the front row and the celebrities. So, I
Mhm.
guess
Yeah,
going back to the
Yeah.
question of identity
Yeah.
crisis.
Peter, yeah,
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 Peter,
yeah.
what would you say?
well,
Mhm.
I think first of all, I think the public in general don't really understand the point of fashion shows, and that's very understandable because today's fashion shows are really more about entertainment and
Mm,
really trying to reach beyond into actual consumers. But what it was is originally was really just re getting like press and buyers. The buyers then for the stores. So it was a very practical thing. And then also they like designers would then show this is what we believe in for the season. And ultimately, that's why some things that are seen in a fashion show don't always end up in a store because the buyers may not necessarily buy it. Now, one of the criticisms from these articles that was saying is that ultimately, like New York Fashion Week designers, like were really lacking creativity. And the majority of it is because they were only making things that would be bought.
mhm,
So a lot of the times you really have to balance your creativity to get the attention and what the fashion is. And then often in the showroom for the buyers are the more commercial pieces that will more often end up in stores. So if the designers are really lacking the creativity, you're going to kind of bore the people who are creating the magazines and the photographers and what's going to end up in a magazine if they're not going to be inspired. And ultimately, where did the buyers buy things as well? You know what I mean? If
Well,
if everything is basics, like, you need some differentiation. But ultimately, because there's the continual threat of a recession happening, designers inevitably play it more safe,
mhm.
um, and really try to do things that will sell because ultimately they're a business and they're trying to keep their lights on and survive.
just one thing I'm curious about, Peter, as I'm listening to, and I'd be remiss to not mention the fact that you worked for Versace out of Milan and Hilfiger. So back in the day when you were a creative designer there, how important were the New York Fashion Weeks for those brands? And does it remain is it the same priority that it was back when you were on the front lines of creative design?
Well, let me just say I was never creative designer at Versace, but beyond that, the like I have to say that we didn't really pay attention to New York Fashion Week. New York Fashion Week, whenever you're talking about the history of it, it used to be at the end, so it used to come at last after Paris, and they had no choice but to go first because ultimately after Paris, people didn't really like care what was happening in New York. In saying that, then whenever you go to the famous Battle of Versailles, where the French designers really challenged, and this was in like the 70s, whenever they had a bunch of the American designers come over and do a fashion show at Versailles, and ultimately the Americans won. They had Liza Minnelli, they had Halston, and they were competing with the more fuddy-duddy. They seemed like a breath of fresh air, that it was all very new, as opposed to the fuddy-duddy and, ladies who lunch clothing that seemed that Yves Saint Laurent and stuff was doing. But it seems that like New York, with its identity, as you're bringing it up, it's just seems very commercial.
Mm.
And so it's more commercial and less creative. Whereas London, it's so creative because it is really these young, hungry designers really trying to grab for attention. And then Milan is much more, your Moschinos, your Versace's, your Armani's, like commercial but designed. And then you go to Paris, which is then the pinnacle.
Well, just to follow up on that, in addition to the identity question, a critique was about fragmentation, that not every designer feels the need to be present at New York Fashion Week versus having their own shows or pop-ups, I suppose. How would you two describe that in terms of the necessity to be involved in New York Fashion Week versus doing something on your own? Britta, what do you see?
Yeah, there's big name designers that are doing their own off-calendar shows.
Mm.
And, you know,
Why is
like
that?
Peter, yeah, like Peter was saying, originally the shows were for the buyers and for the magazine, for editorial. And, for a company to decide to do that in-house off calendar, they can send those personal invites to the people that they really want there and avoid, on the one hand, they're avoiding the huge cost and expense and time and development for all the runway collections to show during New York Fashion Week. And then they're really focusing in on what do they want the buyers to see? What do they want for editorial?
Mhm,
And making it more of a personalized experience for them.
mhm,
Um, and it's so it's kind of one of these things where it's if you're a big name and you have the budget to do this entertainment style show, like we were saying, it's entertainment, that's great. But if you're not in that financial place to be able to do that, I think you still have a great chance of inviting those people to an off-calendar show, and going around your business strategy that way.
and
So yeah, it's just like even we're looking at Saks Fifth Avenue bankruptcy and all the designers that we're showing there, and you just it's really tough out there with the state of the economy, the everything that's happening now. So I
mhm.
really think it's a financial and business decision and still very doable.
I mean, we'll get to the question of whether it's still
Yeah,
worth the return on investment.
yeah, yeah.
But do you expect, Peter, do you expect that trend to continue, that some brands may go it alone and not feel the need to be involved with New York
Oh,
Fashion?
definitely. But it
Why is
takes
that?
because it really envelops the story. Like if you look at Dior, whenever Maria Grazia was the creative director of that, whatever her story it was, whether it was going to India or to Morocco, like it therefore set the scene, and
Mm,
the whole story then would revolve around the designs of what she's talking about at the time. But that is a huge expense because I mean Dior is owned by LVMH, so they could then invite all of these people to come to that, and then they take their time. Whereas if you're having like a Paris or Milan or London Fashion Week, ultimately everyone comes to that city, and then it's event after event after event, which means that the schedule gets very tight from and that's one of the reasons why New York would have it all in one tent because it was all just one after the other. But then, of course, designers want to be individual or they want to make an experience. So it becomes very difficult then for the buyers or journalists to then like scoot all zigzag all over time to each all of these different events. So
Mm,
that's why having it in one place or in one town, it just makes it easier.
mm,
But the visuals for a fashion show will inevitably last a long time.
mm. Moving on, that's very interesting. Moving on, what about sustainability? What role did you see sustainability playing at this most recent Fashion Week?
Well, what was really interesting was the news that London Fashion Week now they are going more sustainable. So they are replicating what is happening in Copenhagen and
Mm,
also even Berlin. Berlin has also said
mm,
that the designers who are showing need to adhere to certain sustainability regulations.
Such as
So
what? Such as what? Just to paint us a picture of what the
well,
priority.
they can't, like, if they're doing a set, for example, they can't just destroy it, or the collections that they're showing have to be certain, have certain sustainability standards within it. So the clothes that they're showing as well. But sometimes, like, these designers make huge big sets and then it's all just destroyed. It's like a one and done. So, they're trying to be more cognizant of that. And ultimately, if New York Fashion Week and the CFDA did adhere to that, then they would make themselves more relevant. So, as Copenhagen, for example, is getting more and more prominent, that like people are now going to it. It's not just a little sideline fashion week anymore. And because its sustainability is really built into the whole entire event, it's getting more and more prestigious and getting more attention.
Mm,
So it makes sense that then London follows suit. But it would also make sense if New York then paid attention and made themselves more relevant to do it. I think for Milan and Paris would be much more difficult because they're such bigger companies that really show there. But for the smaller designers, it can definitely be a way to differentiate yourself.
Mhm.
mm. And Britta, anything that you'd like to add
Yeah,
regarding
well, I was just
sustainability?
thinking about all these regulations that are being put into place, and Europe is way ahead of us as far as these sustainability, requirements, and that's trickling over to the US. So at some point, they're going to be required to follow those regulations, which are going to make them more sustainable or following at least all the things that they're going to be required to do. So,
For example, especially for some of our students who may be tuning in or some aspiring designers, what sort of issues do you see?
yeah, so one that popped into my brain first was like the digital passports. That's going to be a requirement, and that shows the traceability of the entire garment. So whether it's where the fabric has come from, what farm it comes from, all
Mhm.
of those, that's going to be a requirement. So that automatically is going to show the customer, okay, it's organically farmed and the textiles came from here and then it was sewn with a fair wage, fair labor factory. um, all of that will be listed in the digital passport. And then there's things, I don't know, Peter, maybe you're more aware of the final. There was one that if you're over, I mean, if you're a big company and you're over 100 million, like you are not allowed to burn excess inventory or destroy it or ship it to a landfill. But those are for the big names, and I don't know exactly what those regulations were, but that, there's the Fashion Act, and so there are things happening that are going to start forcing the companies to follow those regulations.
Well, certainly we're
Yeah,
going to be
because
following up on that in later episodes, the
Yeah.
sustainability issue, of course. But Peter, I'm sorry, what were we going to add?
no, I was just agreeing with Britta because the extended producer responsibility, which is EPR, it means that then they have to deal with their own waste. So that's one of the reasons why they're not allowed to burn things, which goes back to the scandal of Burberry a few years ago, because Burberry, to keep their clothing exclusive, rather than putting everything that didn't sell into a seal or an outlet, they burnt it all, including perfumes and things like that. So that whenever that came out, their business actually took a hit because, of course, people were up in arms that it's such a waste.
Mm,
So they ended up then doing some PR, and then did a sustainability collection. But it's true, like all of the big brands that sell in Europe are going to, like American brands, like, Ralph Lauren, Calvin Klein, all of that, they're going to have to adhere to these. So it'll be interesting if they take on board what they're learning that they have to do in Europe, and
mhm.
if they adopt those policies, like, company wide, or whether or not they just, keep it fixated on purely in Europe.
Hmm. Wow. Okay. So moving on to, is New York Fashion Week still worth the return on investment? And I suppose, again, I'm something of an outsider to the industry. I guess we could break it down to the larger brands, the known brands versus emerging brands. And so I'm wondering, Peter, anything to say about the return on investment for the bigger name brands? Because Britta, with your event, I know you had some emerging
Mhm.
designers, and so we could talk about that. Was it worth it for them to show their designs? But Peter, first, anything for the bigger name brands? Do you think it's worth it?
I mean, I think so because with the bigger names, like as we were saying earlier, like, it's gone beyond the practicality of a fashion show to, show the magazine editors. And I mean, sales of magazines are going down. So it's really now about clicks and social media and really trying to get things out there. So for the bigger brands, I think yes, to the point that we were saying that they can create their own events. So they're obviously like still doing it. But considering that like fashion shows can be like $200,000,
Mm.
you're talking about a venue, then you need chairs, you need music. So that's DJ. You need then the ability to whatever the music is going to be. Um, then you need like the audio, you need the video equipment, you need the models. It used to be a lot cheaper in the sense that models often got paid with clothing for experience, like so if you had brand new models, they would get the experience to really like do that. And I think sometimes they still do that, but it can be very, very expensive. So if you're a young brand, it may like and you're just constantly trying to sell and trying to keep the lights on, that you're living paycheck to paycheck. That's one of the reasons why with Saks' bankruptcy, like they owe so many small brands and they are like, fighting for their life. So to then pay like 550,000 to $200,000 for a fashion show, it's a lot of money.
Mhm.
And Brita, since you did co-host an event, why don't you tell us about that? Since Peter and I attended as two of your biggest fans, of course.
Yeah.
But you had two panel discussions, including one panel where it involved several young designers who simultaneously showed their creations. So go ahead. Well,
Yeah.
first of all, what speaking of return on investment, if you could paint us a picture as to what your objective was and whether your objective was achieved by organizing and hosting that event. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Well, I started doing events several years ago, and for me, my objective is to get my name out there and my brand out there.
Mhm,
And we're a supportive community platform where we want to support those emerging designers.
mhm.
So, and bringing people together for networking. So the main goal isn't to produce a fashion show for beautiful imagery. It's to bring the community together, hear the stories of the designers themselves.
So here's
And
one example. This is
yeah,
from your event. Peter
yep. And
took this
so,
photo, right? So not only did we have the panelists, as you see off to the left, but
mhm,
then they brought out several of the creations, which you can see to the right. This was an Indian designer
yep.
or Indian
Yeah. And
American.
and so we combined the panel portion as an educational
Mhm,
platform and opportunity. So we bring in industry experts and leaders, and they get to share their work and their knowledge and wisdom with these designers and the consumers that are attending in the audience.
And here's
And
the
it's
second. What just I don't mean
yeah.
to interrupt, but can you see the second one?
Nope, still on the first one.
Oh, hold on, real quick, real quick. I have the technology here. And then there was this panel discussion involving several professors and more academic teacherly types talking about their
Yeah.
wisdom and all
Yeah.
that, right?
And so
Who was
these
that?
are
Yeah.
these are top industry pros. So for them to be at our panel, to be able to meet them, to chat with them in person and hear about their work, is just was such a great honor. And
Mhm,
it was great to have them there. And what we found is afterwards, the attendees were just flocking to them because everyone wanted to talk to them. And
mhm.
as far as the return on investment,
Yeah.
so this was broken down into two panels as an example. So the first panel was
Mhm,
three designers that are upcycling, recycling, doing all sustainable, zero waste or whatever their process
mhm,
was. But they bring their own models. Oftentimes they're friends, volunteers. They do their own hair and makeup.
mhm,
So what if they want to hire professional models and use them, that's totally up
mhm,
to them and their budget. But this also gives a platform for models to volunteer. They are getting imagery. We had 5 photographers there,
Mm.
and we didn't even hire them. They were volunteer photographers. Some of the panel speakers brought their own photographers.
And
So we're getting
videographers.
all kinds of press and imagery and social media posts for me without even really doing, doing anything besides hosting the event. So there's all of those things that do happen from participating and hosting these kind of things. And, to see a real return financially, that's going to be a
Yeah.
longer game. If the designers get some sales, it's hard for me to see what happens on their end, but at least the return for me is giving that opportunity and a space for a small brand to share their voice and their vision. And I mean, we had 150 people there, and we were at capacity and tickets were still selling, and we had to cut it off because it was just getting too crowded. So people are interested and they want to support these kind of designers and hear from these leaders. So to me, that the return for my event is definitely well worth it.
And I mean, one critique was that the free wine ran out early, but that's
Yes.
something else. But
Yes.
but but just actually from a strategic communications perspective, I'm wondering ultimately, is it all about evidence, generating evidence and the social media content? Because for example, with you, you founded the Conscious Fashion Design Academy in
Mhm.
Portland, in which you're bringing together community. And you can't
Right.
just say, hey, part of what we do is we bring together community. You need
Mhm.
evidence to prove that you bring together community. So there you go. You organize it. You got the photos, you got the videos, you plant a flag, and it's very persuasive to someone like
Mhm.
me or anyone who watches, like, oh, your CFDA presumably is impactful. At least you're active. And then for these
Right.
young designers, it's worth it however they spend out of pocket. Then they say, we need photographers, not just models, but photographers. We need it
Yeah.
for Instagram and our other platforms. Is it really all about generating evidence and the social media platforms?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you have that clip of the interview. So we had also we used all volunteers. So
Mm.
we had a volunteer gal who went around interviewing people, attendees, and just getting their feedback. So there was one clip you had that just kind of demonstrates the excitement and why that person is there.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, and it just continues to grow and build that community. And, you're building up a reputation for like myself as a brand and a business of the type of event that I can do. And then eventually leading people to look up the Conscious Fashion Design Academy. If they need more education or support, they have a place to go.
See, it's an
I mean,
interesting. Yeah, I'm sorry.
ultimately that's one of the beautiful things with social media is that it became everything democratic. I mean, just to move on to like talk about strategies that designers can do. Like one of the things that I had seen recently was La Watch Party. So it's this guy called Lias who created an app and then also was really trying to create community similar to yourself, Britta, that to have this huge big screen where people could actually gather and watch fashion shows. And the
Mm,
whole idea is that it's really about bringing people of similar interests and then they all, just like come together and watch the fashion shows so that it's taken that entertainment and an event one step further. But what was interesting on his Instagram account recently, he was saying that like Vogue had like stolen his idea.
mm,
And what they were doing, the same as most fashion shows, that, it's all very exclusive. Like his whole thing was trying to make it inclusive. And so they were again trying to uh, therefore that the public can't join and can't be a part of it. Even whenever you go on to Vogue today, it used to be you could watch all the runway shows and things like that, and now you have to pay for it. I mean, of course, that's partly to do with the fact that magazines, people aren't buying magazines as much because they're all online. And
Yeah.
so they're trying to have to make money some way, shape, or form. But ultimately, then that immediately makes all the teenagers and people who are into fashion who can't then afford these subscriptions that then, okay, so where do they go and get their fashion fix? And so now that other people are really trying to build strategies around that to make it inclusive, the doors of these fashion shows are still being closed on them.
And one last thing, by the way, Peter and I attended a couple events together where I did notice that during the breaks, people love to, especially the more glamorously dressed folks, love to jump onto the runway
Mhm.
with the signage in the background, like, okay, take a photo of me. Okay, okay, now, and posing or in front of the signage. And so I guess it's not just evidence that I was there, but you could also present yourself as perhaps more involved than you actually are because I went and I got my photo taken in
Yeah.
a beauty
I
shot.
found that I found that really fascinating because I didn't witness that the last fashion week
Yeah.
that I attended,
Yeah.
but this time around, every show I went to, there were people, attendees dressed up. They put on their best outfit. They went, just like you said, they went onto the runway. They were walking the runway and their friends are filming them. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
they're creating social media. It looks like they're walking
Yeah. Yeah.
a New York fashion show runway.
Fake news, as they would say.
Which
Yeah.
It's
also shows
amazing.
what, I
Yeah.
mean, that also gives evidence to why it is beneficial to do it. Because if everyone posts a thing that they were there
Well, there's
trying to
that.
feel exclusive,
Yeah,
then you're spreading the word
that's
of
right.
your event.
Yeah.
And please, Britta, please remind me the name, the roll down screen with the different brand names and organizational names on the
Oh,
background.
the step and repeat.
Step and repeat,
Step
right?
and
With the
repeat.
red
It's
carpet
photo.
and all that. So people
Yep.
love standing in front of those and having
Yeah.
photos taken. And you're
Yep.
right, Peter. Then it's like, hey, it's a win-win. You
Yeah.
get to post something on your social media, and Britta's CFDA is in the background, for
You've got
example.
all the logos on there and the
That's right.
sponsors. Yeah, and that's great opportunity for anyone that's sponsoring. They get their name out there, everyone tags everyone else, and so it just kind of spreads. And so speaking of return on investment,
Yes.
if
Yes.
it's not financial, you're getting at least the publicity and it's
Yeah.
marketing.
Yeah.
And so they're all positive. That's all positive part of it.
It
No.
is, but the only thing I would also caution is that you need to then have metrics in place. So, for example, if you do decide to go and, have a fashion show, like you need to be able to measure, like, okay, how many mentions did we get? How
Mhm.
many posts did we have? How many, so that therefore you can then translate that, like, did we get a bump in sales? Did we get any more buyers visiting us?
Right. Right.
Was there more traffic to our website? Was there more sales on the website? You need to be able to connect the dots so that whenever you decide, like, okay, are we going to do another fashion show? You need to have the metrics and evidence in place to be like, okay, yes, it worked, or no, it didn't. Or if it didn't, like, how can we do it? And there needs to be a strategy in place and to know how to measure it.
Cool. So just moving forward and segueing from the question of whether it's worth it or not, New York Fashion Week. If you were an emerging designer, right? What strategies would you employ for a successful show? And keeping in mind that we may have some emerging designers and aspiring designers listening in. What are your top two, three tips, perhaps, that you would share?
I mean, for me, one of the stories I always loved was like Kenneth Cole, whenever he was started his business, like he hired, I think it's about being scrappy and being original, and I think that then people are gravitate towards that. Him, whenever he started, there was a big fashion show and he couldn't afford to do a fashion show. But what he did was that he rented this big truck and he kitted it out inside as if it was like a pop-up store. So when people were coming out of the fashion show, he was trying to get them into the truck to sort of get his name out there and also get sales, get attention, and it worked. And so based on that, like, that's what then really started his career and company.
That's what they call guerrilla marketing, no? Trying to
Yeah.
do something clever in the streets, daring, right? In the streets.
Yep. And it's also cheaper. You know what I mean? It's like you work with the budget you have.
Yeah. I don't
And
know if you saw the video of the Chanel fashion show. It was done in the New York subway underground,
Oh
mm,
yeah.
and they had all the models. I'm sure it still cost a fortune,
mm,
but because they had chairs set up and they had attendees and but they had the models coming off of the
mm,
subway and they were all coordinated, and it was a really interesting show. So I think there's
mm,
if you can be clever and think out of the box, you can come up with those ideas. There were some fashion shows in the street
mm,
last September.
mm,
Um, I mean, which would require, I guess, in New York City, some sort of, you've got to block off the street and there's all those things. But I think people can be creative and clever and scrappy
mm,
and find a way to show your collection. And, we were saying earlier, models want the experience and they want the photos. So you can get volunteer models who are just trying to break in to the industry. And so there's ways you can do it. I wouldn't say it's certainly not impossible. It's challenging, but I believe that, if you've got a story to tell and you've got a nice collection put together, you
mm,
can find a way to do it.
and
Yeah, the other thing,
yeah,
sorry, the other thing I was going to say is like, because Michael, I think you mentioned the other watch party closer,
Yeah, yeah. That,
CLOSR,
mm,
which
yep.
also then link to directly to seals. So as people watch them, people can also buy. So adding on top of all of that, there is then the digital thing where people have a computer in their hand where they can immediately buy something,
mm,
or at least being driven to your website.
mm.
So with with technology added on to all of this, there is definitely many different ways and strategies you can really employ.
And to be fair, for anyone listening in who may feel pressured that, okay, I have to come up with something original, something
Yeah.
creative. You know what? I suppose you could also steal some ideas because
Mhm.
even I'm just imagining that those, if it's Kenneth Cole with the truck, maybe he didn't invent the wheel on that one. Maybe,
Right,
yeah, I'm
right.
sure it's very rare to come up with a truly, purely original
Yeah.
idea versus adapting what's worked. You can research what sort of guerrilla marketing tactics have
Hmm.
worked and adapt it to your local reality. Hey, we have a subway. We could do
Yep.
something in our city, that sort of thing. Now, okay,
Yeah.
what do we do? Right?
And if you've got one of these,
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
you can create your own videos. There's all kinds of apps to do editing and
Mhm.
text overlays and promoting your brand. So there's multiple, tools that people can use.
The,
Yeah, because even
yeah.
going back to like the pandemic and the
Yeah.
alternatives that then people had to be inventive whenever you couldn't do a fashion show, which ultimately was also more sustainable. But if you look at the spring show of Moschino from 2021, like they had done all these little mannequins, so all these um,
Uh,
marionettes puppets were like going down the runway and they had all little different, but they had an under winter version and all the people who would be on the front row, and then they had mini versions of the clothing
yeah.
that then they could so that then these marionettes were then modeling the clothing, and because it was so
It's a
original, it
beautiful
was
picture. I
so
mean, it's a brilliant idea as well, right? Look at
Yeah.
that.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
shared like consistently throughout. And then beyond that, obviously you can take videos, the joy with videos, or it's the tried and tested lookbook that whenever you do it, you print it, you can send it to whomever. With a video, digital, you can do it being creative with whomever, and then also send that out. Like it's really there is many different alternatives that you don't have to do a fashion show, and ultimately it's easier to share if you're having like digital images or videos to you can email them to any like magazine editor, buyer, whomever, just to hopefully like come and see your showroom. And on top of that, you don't even have to have your own showroom because there is collective showrooms that if like a showroom can have multiple designers all in the one space.
Mm.
Mhm. And now with AI as well, you could do a whole AI type of lookbook, things created that you've designed, not designed through AI, but you can take your creations and create a 3D avatar and create a lookbook
Mm,
and show it that way. And that's maybe for a designer who makes to order. You know,
mm.
that they don't have an inventory, they're a smaller brand. They can sell and show and even put together some sort of fashion show digitally to show their designs and then take orders directly from a customer.
Just can you think of one example? I mean, just to provide some useful information for the audience.
Well, what
Sure.
comes to my
Yeah.
mind is
Yeah.
tools that people use, like Clo3 or Browseware, those where you can actually, you put on the garment the fabric that you're using, and you can show a front and a back, and you can adjust the seams, and
Uh,
so you can create this kind of 3D avatar through these tools, and then you take that image and you plop it into a blank page and put it together like a lookbook.
mm.
So there's many tools out there now that you can do that
Uh,
kind of thing
uh,
and still have authentic
uh,
design
I was
behind
just
it.
I was just wondering if there's any designer who specifically did that that
Ah,
caught your eye that you might suggest as a reference for people to go check them out.
I haven't seen a specific designer do a whole collection like that, but I've seen, like things online where you could look up a lookbook type of
Okay.
thing. But yeah, no, I can't really think of anyone specific that's
Uh-huh.
doing that.
Let people go to ChatGPT and ask
Yeah, yeah, you can find
that
it
sort of
and
thing. So one last question. I'm curious because several of the shows became a bit political with ICE and the anti-immigration fervor of the Trump administration. We can name names here. There was some resistance to that, and including at a couple of shows, people wearing some of the models wearing ICE outs or some anti-ICE messaging. And so it's raised an interesting question about the mix between fashion and politics. Is this something new, Peter, or is there some historically has fashion always been a place where politics mix?
I mean, what I find interesting was that there was in New York Fashion Week, there was really just a handful of designers who either addressed it or talked about it. Some just vaguely in the notes, the show notes would say like, "Oh, in the times we live in, blah blah blah." But ultimately, fashion has always been political.
Hmm.
Like you can,
Hmm.
if you look
Example.
at the history, like I mean, Vivienne Westwood, she started a career as punk and created that whole look.
Uh-huh.
So beyond then punk, then Catherine Hamnett in the 80s, like she was then doing these big. That became a whole trend. Like even then, Wham started wearing it. That these brightly black and white graphic tees that she wore to make a political statement whenever she went to meet Margaret Thatcher at the time. So fashion ultimately is a reflection of culture. And so if this is the culture that we are in at the minute, then it should be political. People should be making a statement. And ultimately, just to go back to how designers coming up can make a statement is by gaining the attention. I understand in, New York or in America, considering it's so divided and there's a continual backlash that people do not necessarily want to alienate consumers or potential customers.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it's also about finding your tribe. And if you as a company have certain values, like that's how your customers will connect with you if you're able to share that.
Just one side note, back in the day, my namesake, Michael Jordan, a basketball player, in case you've heard the name, back when he was at the pinnacle of his fame and selling his Air Jordans, and him being a black man, of course, there was some pressure that, hey, why don't you speak up about some of these racial issues? And he famously said, Republicans buy my sneakers too. Okay. He did not want to get involved, like you just said, not wanting to antagonize perhaps half the country at the time, right? And to have that a big tent approach to trying to attract customers. Britta, is there anything you want to add about the mix between fashion and politics?
Yeah, I think it is again about finding your tribe, and fashion is a way you can express your personal values. And if it's your own brand, your namesake brand, and you are anti this or pro that, I say use it as a platform to share your beliefs and your value system. And if somebody doesn't like it, that's not going to be the person that's your customer. It's not going to be the person in your tribe. You're going to find the people that do resonate with that, and they'll be loyal customers, I think, because of that. So, you're always going to lose some people. You're not going to get everyone that's going to like you or like your style. So
Mm.
focus on what you do best and what you believe in, and fashion is a great platform to share that story.
Well, actually, that also connects to strategic communications more than find your tribe. It's also thinking about, okay, this is who I am, this is what my product is, but who exactly is my target audience and why, right?
Yeah, because
And
I
your
think customers.
ideal, just to finish, and your ideal client's profile, thinking through who and why and justifying, defending. And you can say, I don't care about appealing to all of America or all of Europe or the entire world. I see who my tribe is, but you can also justify and defend. And you think there's potential to earn money from that tribe as well, ideally, to stay alive. I'm sorry, Peter, what were you going to say?
No, I was just saying that I do believe that people connect more through authenticity because,
Uh-huh.
again, where we have like social media, people are aware that there's a fakeness to that or there's a veneer, and that ultimately they want to see beyond that. So if they feel that there's an emotional connection to what you're doing,
Yeah.
like one of the ones that I thought was really inspiring, again, just to show how it can really set you apart, is leaning into it. In Paris Fashion Week this week, there was a brand called Matier Facal, which did a whole show around the 1%. And it was in three parts. So the first part was about the 1%, all these billionaires that were walking around with canes, and they had
Top hats.
white. Yes, with top hats, and they were blinded with money. They had glasses and their eyes covered with money. They had white gloves with red palms to show they have blood on their hands. They didn't have handcuffs. They had their hands bound with like strings of pearls. And then the second part was about community, and it was about the cult because they're these people on the fringes, but therefore they've created their own community and their own 1%. And then the last third part of the show was about the power of the future. And so it was really taking this idea of where we are now and where it can go. And because it was so creative, it was making such a statement. It like, oh my God, it was all over like social media. And so everyone then raving about this show, which therefore means it's got attention. It will get more sales. It'll attract and buyers to want to jump on what's cool in stores. And it's that's where then, just to make it full circle, where we started about the identity crisis of New York Fashion Week, and how if it is purely commercial, like I don't think anyone needs to see a pair of khaki pants walking down a runway. Everyone knows what it looks like, knows what the fit will be like. It's like people are craving something new, interesting, and what is your perspective and point of view?
And authentic. I like that.
Yeah.
Authentic. And by the way, your French pronunciation is excellent. But what's the name again and the translation?
Matière fécale.
Which
I think
means,
the translation I think means fecal matter.
oh, well, that would grab a little attention too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that's the thing. They're making a statement right from the name.
Yeah.
Right, right. Okay.
I'm gonna have to look that one up. Yeah, I
Yes.
haven't seen
Well,
it, but
that's why I wanted you to repeat it so that in case anyone's jotting it down at home.
very
Okay.
intriguing for sure.
Okay.
Mhm.
Any final words, or are we wrapping up here?
Yeah, I think we can wrap up. And we were
Okay.
talking about in our first episode how we'd like to wrap up with a call to action for our listeners. So
Mm,
as you're talking about this final fashion show you mentioned, Peter, I'm thinking, okay, call to action for
mm,
listeners.
mm.
And so what would that be?
I think one of the things that people should do is really support young designers.
Absolutely.
Like really like research them and dig them out and support them and what they're doing, because ultimately you will get a unique thing in your wardrobe that no one else will have. You'll look way more individual than everyone just dressed continually the same.
Hmm. And
Mm.
you're supporting those small brands, which most likely are doing sustainable methods in some manner, small
Yeah.
batch, made to order, upcycled, recycled,
And ultimately,
repurposed.
if you buy directly from their website, then you're also cutting out the middleman of, some of those stores. But either
Absolutely.
way, I think supporting small brands would be my call
Yeah.
to action for people.
And
Do a bit of research.
and
And
just to
I'll
go ahead. I'm sorry,
I was
Brie.
gonna say I'll add in that
Yeah.
if you've ever wanted to go to New York Fashion Week, it's not just for the buyers and the journalists and the magazines. Like we were talking about, there was, estimated 200 events, panel talks, mixers, $40. $30, $10. There's all these events that you can attend. And so don't let the idea of the big white tent and big brand names, scare you away because those are, 2 grand and up maybe for a ticket. But there are so many ways you can get involved and attend things as just a regular attendee. And so just do Google searching, find something that interests you and show up.
Well, it's
And you were saying there on Eventbrite, wasn't that?
Yeah, look, any of the kind of those invite platforms, Luma is a good one. And, when you find somebody producing an event, you can follow them on that, Luma or Eventbrite, and you can see all their upcoming events. And, if you just even Google search fashion events during New York Fashion Week or, just do some research, so many things will pop up. And so I don't think it would be difficult to find something to attend.
Well, just to add two things. One to what Britta said about attending the events, don't underestimate the value of being there and networking. So if I were
Absolutely.
you too, I would also have a batch of name cards. I know it's old school, okay,
Yeah.
but even name cards to hand out at these events because there are lots of schmoozing opportunities. You probably wind up chatting with half a dozen folks and maybe planting seeds for future partnership and following up on what Peter said, supporting young designers. I also, in terms of your own strategic communications, if you are emerging or aspiring and you feel the need for evidence to prove that you are who you say you are, that it may be worth some modest out-of-pocket expense, or you can think of some way to really do it on a shoestring, but for that photographic or video evidence for your social media platforms to create
Mhm.
your own online showcase of or gallery of your work in action.
Yeah, share your experience on LinkedIn and
Yeah,
what your goal is if you want to reach certain people. You can use that experience as, I went here to learn this and I met these people and this is how I'm going to use it moving forward. Send me a message. There's so many great ways you can capture that and use it,
great.
for that outreach.
And
Okay.
I would also just last point, sorry, Michael. I would also encourage young designers to create their own community with each other because what can take so long is sourcing. So whether it's sourcing materials, buttons, zips, or a specific kind of fabric that you're looking for, and if you're able to lean on each other to say like, oh, do you know where I could find fusibles or any other like materials that would be necessary, like that can be very helpful.
I
And
did
be prepared to reciprocate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did hear a really good example at one of the events. This was a real collaboration that was already happening. Is there was a clothing designer, so all small independent. So this clothing designer met a handbag designer and they met a jewelry maker. So they all got together and put together their own little show. And so they split the cost, whatever they wanted to, budget in, they all worked together.
Hmm.
And it wasn't necessarily sharing materials, but they were banding together to form one showcase. And they had just met through networking and ended up having a great time together. And
Sounds
that's
good.
just domino effect too. Then they bring in maybe a friend. And so
That's
that whole
exciting.
networking side of it and collaborations is, definitely, you know, I feel like when I was started in the industry, it's so cutthroat and so competitive that we would never be sharing our creative work with somebody else. That's not the case anymore. Now it's, people are coming together to support each other, and collaborations are a great way to do that. And that didn't happen so much in the past, but it is looking very bright for that in the future. And so, yeah, come meet people, network, and yeah.
On that note, speaking of networking, now you see some of our various specialties here. We would also encourage
Oh,
viewers, listeners to also
you,
reach out, engage with us. Certainly, we welcome comments, subscribe, forward on links to these recordings. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in episode number 3.
Bye, everyone.
See you next
Bye-bye.
time.
That's it for today's episode of The Fashion Situation Room.
Thanks for spending time with us on the front lines of fashion.
If you found value in this conversation, please subscribe, share, and leave a review. It helps us bring more meaningful voices to the table.
And what call to action did you take? Let us know in the comments. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.